Alon, please start.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Hey everyone, great to be here. Thank you, Victor, for having me. So Alon, I'm from FinOps platform based in Tel Aviv, and today I actually want to continue the discussion that I think we just started about kind of like some of the challenges that AI costs, and more specifically, I would say LLM are actually introducing. And I'm gonna try to keep it light and kind of like wrap up with a very, very quick demo of how we are tackling some of these stuff here with Out. But let's just get starting. So, first thing first, I think by now it's probably clear looking at the agenda of this great summit is that, okay, it is a big deal. So, kind of like starting with that, we always had internally this dilemma of is AI just another type of cloud spend, or is there is actually something new here? Or so I always like to start with this slide that I think demonstrates some of the challenges, the unique challenges that we are facing now as kind of like FinOps practitioners with the huge surge with AI adoption. So first of all, I would actually start with the multi-tool complexity. So I think Donald just kind of like wrapped up with the question of should I use a single hyperscaler? Should I use several? I think in the world of AI, at least at the moment, what we are seeing among our customer base is that the majority of the accounts, regardless to where they are on their adoption journey of AI, are actually starting from the get-go with kind of like multiple tools in place. I think just my assumption is that it will emerge over time to kind of like to the leaders, and companies will start actually sticking to one or two providers that are going to provide the full suite. But for now, we definitely see a very significant tendency toward multi-tools. So by definition, from a FinOps perspective, that creates some challenges, right? Moreover, I think that what we are seeing, and I think Anthropic and OpenAI demonstrated very well that on the one hand, the actual capabilities they offer are tremendous, but on the other hand, those are still relatively young companies that allows, especially for FinOps, but not only FinOps practitioners, but in general, like the entire suite they offer is still kind of like evolving. So tagging, to be very specific, is very limited to the extent of even not available in some cases, which makes it hard for us to track and try to optimize. Um, and I would say that again, the fact that what we are seeing, it's typically kind of like a mashup between, yes, I will use cognitive services in Azure, but in parallel, I will use perhaps Cursor for my coding, and I will probably use OpenAI for some other stuff directly. So this is kind of like a very challenging starting point. Now, in parallel to that, obviously, we are seeing the surge is just unbelievable. The this is obviously anonymized, but I think the trend line is what interesting here, right? So looking at 2025, it's like three times higher. The budgets and the spend that's going on invested in AI workloads, and the trend is actually continuing, right? It never stops. So this is setting the stage. This is where we are right now. I guess it's not a surprise, and because we don't have a whole lot of time, I actually want to do a little spotlight on OpenAI from this lens, right? From the lens of what does it really mean from a FinOps perspective, this momentum that we are seeing. So before we dive into kind of like a very specific example, for those of you, I imagine most of the audience here is very much familiar with OpenAI or Anthropic is very similar, but just kind of like to align ourselves conceptually, yes, terms can be different, but instance type in AWS is probably best being equivalent to a model. Service type is the type of operation that you are running, and the compute units in most cases, the common ones at least, will be tokens. So while it sounds differently, it behaves differently sometimes. Conceptually, it is a spend to a cloud provider Hence, the same concept should be applied. So if AWS bills for 4 hours of this and that instance, OpenAI will bill you for you know 15,000 tokens used for GPT. So different jargon really, but the same thing. Um, so let's take an example, which I imagine 80% of the accounts out there are actually doing. You want to start, you get this pressure from leadership that, okay, hey, we need to do some AI stuff and quickly. So one of the most common and obvious use cases is some sort of a chatbot, right? It can be a sales chatbot, it can be a support one. So we are kind of like, we released the first version, it works well, but then a very smart individual in the organization thinks that, hey, I want to optimize kind of like performance. And one of the ways that is very compelling for me to do is simply to include, much longer customer history in the prompt that I'm sending, right? So that sounds like a very good idea. Click the button, and then you wake up middle of the night to see that the cost actually surged like 10 times easily, and all due to a very simple naive kind of like a step that a certain individual in the company took, right? And this is again extremely common, right? Like this is not just one in a million. We are seeing this happens times after times, and I think it really tells the story of how LLM is different in that terms because it's so immediate, it's so fast. Like doing, in this case, a mistake most likely is just extremely common. Um, and the problem is, even if you were able to identify the surge, which is not always the case sometimes, right? But even if you were able, unless you took some steps in advance to make sure that you have actually the ability to allocate and attribute the cost, you will just see kind of like a line saying, okay, yeah, you paid $15,000, right? For it can be for a project in the case of OpenAI, it can be for an API key perhaps, but it won't really tell you the full story. And this is just what it is right now. Like this is really, yes, they starting both OpenAI and Anthropic as the leaders in this category started to expose. Properly kind of billing data and usage data for API, but there is literally no tagging, right? You have some metadata fields, but not pure tagging that can really kind of like match one to how you manage um, chargebacks, showbacks, or just basic attribution. So this is kind of like just kind of like to give you an example of how, like, for me, like it's so obvious, and so the difference between how robust and truly amazing the product those companies offer are in the case of OpenAI, and how lean is the billing offering that they offer to the customers. And in this case, by the way, no difference between an API or the console that they offer the same data. So you can see that there's literally no tags. The only metadata that is exposed in the cost and the usage data. This is, by the way, this is just a payload of the response you're going to get from the cost API in OpenAI, right? So what you can see, you will see project ID, and based on the project ID, you should be able to allocate, right? This is the expectation. If you're going to join it with the usage data, sure, you're going to get user ID, you're going to get an API key, but that's pretty much it, right? And with that in mind, there is really a very, very immediate call for action because, again, this is not just a very niche type of spend. We're seeing customers of ours that it's already kind of like in the 5-10% of the overall cloud spend that is actually going into these platforms, and the fact that they suddenly wake up understanding, hey, I don't have really a way to allocate or to understand who drives this cost. Uh, Sometimes it can be quite late and very painful to really fix it after there are some really established workflows deployed to production. So kind of like before going kind of like to show you how we are handling it and approaching those challenges in FinOps, I would just say that what we are seeing and what we are hearing some of our more experienced user would say doing is um, just relying on best practices is nice. Sometimes companies actually prefer it in early stages because they do want to encourage experimentation mindset, and they want to kind of like remove the barriers as much as possible. So I can say that we're seeing actually customers, even very advanced kind of like FinOps practices, kind of like preventing and having kind of like very strict governance framework in place since early stages. Probably not trivial to deploy across the organization, but what you can control most likely is just, the fundamentals of FinOps, right? Just kind of like naming convention. Try to have some sort of a setup in place of how you're managing API keys, how you set up the projects in OpenAI, to just to make sure that when and this moment will arrive, that you would like to start actually treating it as any other spend, you will have at least the infrastructure, so to speak. And of course, there is always the option of adopting some sort of a proxy pattern. Now, by proxy, I mean a centralized gateway. There are many options to do that. That actually going to route all the requests that is going out to LLM vendors or AI vendors, and ensuring that those have the needed tags and the needed metadata that is needed for FinOps or reporting practices, right? Um, and with that, I actually want to go and show you very quickly how we're doing things in FinOut. I will try to keep it very short and won't give you kind of like a full-blown demo, but the idea is, let's stick with the use case I started with. There is a chatbot in place. So sure, here in FinOut, you're going into, this is clearly a demo account, and we have kind of like cost coming in from all the different tools. Now you want to actually just get started by, okay, I just want to see kind of like my OpenAI spend, right? So you can just easily go filter by OpenAI. Now this obviously doesn't really tell me a whole lot because, okay, you just spend, doesn't answer kind of like my real pain. So what you're probably going to do then, you're going to go and you want to see it by project, because again, that's the most meaningful business wise term that you have to use with, right? So you can actually go ahead and just group by project and start seeing what actually drives the spend, and where the surge actually happens, right? So you can see that in our case, we have 4 projects in place. By the names, you can understand that those are actually the ones used by the business for aligned with kind of like marketing, inventory, sales, HR automation. So with actual features or workflow. But with that alone, that's probably not enough. What you want to see is you want to say, okay, my sales bot is actually part of my messaging effort. So I want to see this in the context of my messaging spend. So what you could do then, you can actually go ahead and go and create a virtual tag and basically tag the data virtually within After Effects, right? Even if your team didn't do it to begin with or were not able to do so. And you can just simply go here and add another rule that goes and actually going to group all the cost under the messaging label. So you can go ahead and say where the project is, sales bot. You can just save that, go back here and just refresh the page, and it's instantly, it's like in real time. You're actually going to go and see this cost goes under the messaging or project or offering, like in our case here in this demo. Um, and yeah, just go ahead here and you can just group by the cost center. And you can see here that OpenAI is actually now part of the overall spend alongside other cost centers, right? So you can just see it here side by side and see that it is now part of it. Now, I think I have another minute. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, the speakers after me. I'm just going to go and show you then in FinOut, once we have this notion in place, and they do have a very straightforward way to just see and visualize the data. I can just with just a few clicks go ahead and create an alert that the next time this kind of like surge going to happen, I'm going to be alerted instantly, right? So let's say in our case, I want to be exceeding or spike, let's say, right? And you can go here and just filter by um, sales. Yep, under the sales bot project, and you can say that when the sales bot, the cost associated to the sales bot is actually going up 20%, like obviously you can customize it as you see fit, and more than, let's say, I don't want to wake up middle of the night because $20, but if it goes above, let's say, $1,000, right, just kind of like hit me in my Slack endpoint. You can send an email, you can do Teams, you can do whatever works best. And I want this one to be evaluated kind of like on a daily basis, and just that's it, simple as that. Just save it. Um, and you will be alerted the next time. Um, so spoke a lot. I think that's pretty much kind of like in what I wanted to surface. And yeah, I want to kind of like just stop here um, just ask for questions and see how we can move this discussion further.
Yeah, thanks Alon for the wonderful talk. Give some love in the reactions for Alon. I think it was a great talk, and especially following up for what we discussed in the webinar that we had before, and all this topic about FinOps for AI. I think you are perfectly on time. So we have some minutes for questions. So please feel free to use the Q&A in the chat to do so. There are some, questions around tagging. So I can probably get you a direct question with about the tagging topic.
Yeah.
Basically, what are your recommendations for automation and guardrails for that? And also, yeah, that's the idea. What are your recommendations there?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of like in a perfect world, I would say, when you get started, and again, this is no difference in OpenAI and Anthropic. I'm being kind of like specific to those vendors because it works different with the hyperscalers. We can touch base on that as well in a sec. But basically, if you can, you want to be very intentional about how you are distributing the API keys across your organization. So what I'm seeing kind of like some of our customers are doing, some are basically structuring project, like aligning an OpenAI project with a specific feature. Others will do that with a specific team. Other will do that with a user. Honestly, it all works quite well as long as you are very much consistent. In the case of OpenAI and Anthropic, again, because they don't really have the notion of labels built in within the platforms, if it's in the case that you don't want to do it kind of like one by one, meaning or one to one, meaning a project, a user, or an API key to a very for every user for every workflow, then you will have to have some sort of an after effect kind of like a mapping as I try to demonstrate with FinOut or in any other tool for that matter that allows that. And it should give you like the granularity that you are looking for. In a word, I would say that it works different. Let's take Bedrock, for example, kind of like which is gaining a lot of traction, very popular. In Bedrock, the way to do that is actually use inference profiles, which is kind of like one of those hidden tagging capabilities that I think many Bedrock, even heavy users of Bedrock, don't fully realize or utilize. So inference profile will kind of like, will align, I would say, Bedrock usage and billing data with the standard tagging and labeling that we all know and love in AWS. But if you don't do that, if you don't use an inference profile, um, then you are in a pickle because you're gonna have to try and figure it out after effect, which is almost impossible to be honest. So yeah.
Yeah, no, doing that inspection like that for, let's say, forensic analysis is
Yeah,
one of the
exactly.
most
Exactly.
difficult thing if we are translating from the security perspective.
Yeah.
So definitely, I think the similitudes between FinOps and security sometimes is spot from one time to another. So thanks for the clarifications. Thanks for the talk, Alon. It was a pleasure as
Thank you so
always.
much.